Okay, hello and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. Today, we're on a much more serious topic than we usually are on a Friday night. We're going to be talking about the experiences of the frontline journalists in Tehran in Iran. And I'm joined actually by a friend and a longtime friend of Future Media. And Phil Chetwynd is the Global News Director of AFP, which is Agence France Presse, 1,700 journalists in 150 countries. I believe the largest newsroom in the world, and Phil runs it. And I think five, Phil, is that right? Five of your people are in Iran?
Yeah, I'd say we're one of the largest newsrooms in the world, I would say. And we do, at the moment, we have five staff in Tehran, yeah.
All right. So we've known each other a long time. We've both worked either on front lines or with frontline war correspondents over our careers. How are they doing? And you're experienced in lots of wars now. I think the last time we stopped and chatted, it was about Gaza.
Yeah.
What's different about this one? What are you finding so far?
Thanks, Ricky. It's great to be here. So Iran is very, very different. We have an office, a team of 5 journalists in Tehran. And I think the great difference with Gaza is, one, the internet is down controlled. There's very little coverage. So whereas what you would have seen in Gaza, Lebanon, and so on is a sort of live streaming of war straight up, which
Yeah, we did.
you'd see on TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. There's sort of literally just this fire hose of content and suffering, the sort of effects of war really straight up. We're not seeing that out of Iran, mainly because the internet is down. It's extremely hard to have connectivity, to upload content, and so on. And also because the Iranian regime is still in charge.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of control. So what we're seeing on the streets of Tehran, it's dangerous to go around. It's dangerous because I guess you could be struck from above. There's a very intense activity, but also dangerous because there's a lot of police and a lot of controls. They've really brought a lot of security onto the streets, and people are afraid. People are afraid to speak. So and so you're not getting these human stories and images and so on that you were getting out of Gaza, every single day. And so there's very little imagery and there's very little real storytelling coming out of Iran. There's fragments and pieces and little pieces that we can put together. But you're not getting, if you compare to Gaza, that real strong human emotion and the feel of a population under war, as it were.
I remember when we spoke last time, I think the article I wrote was about the fact that this was kind of the first real kind of war where every single person was reporting it. It was kind of just an absolute blast of information. Okay, but this one's a vacuum, right? Which is the really interesting piece, because it's not exactly known. I mean, you'd know, please, and share. Iran's not exactly forthcoming in releasing information outside its borders. It's a very secretive nation. So it's natural then that you have a secretive war. That must make it extremely difficult for you to cover it.
It is. I mean, I would say Iran, of all the countries we cover in the world, and really we cover every country in the world, including North Korea, it's one of the hardest places to work as a journalist. The security state is all-consuming, and so there's a lot of fear. And you have to remember, it's also a state that hasn't hesitated in the past to arrest journalists and foreign journalists. We all remember Jason Rezaian of the Washington Post, who spent several years in jail in Iran. And I believe there's a Japanese journalist that has been detained in Tehran in recent days. So that sort of threat is very real. And that has a sort of chilling effect on sort of one's ability to work. When you factor in, as I said, the communication issues as well and the uncertainty, it really adds to that. And so there's a really good example, actually. Was a lot of people have been reporting on an incident in the south of Iran where a girls' school seems to have
Yeah.
been struck.
On the first day, wasn't it? In the first couple of
It
hours?
was. It seems a girls' school with over 100 kids, and it's been very hard to report on because, of course, the only images and so on that came forth were really from state Iranian TV, which, of course, immediately meant there was a big disinformation campaign against it, saying, "Well, this is obviously made up, this is untrue," and so on. And all the digital verifiers at places like AFP, the New York Times, elsewhere, have really been able to do a lot of work on that story, and everything points to it being true. Everything points to it being correct. We've been able to identify the building, the school, the place. The US and Israel have not denied it. They simply said we're looking at it. So it's should be an incredibly powerful story. But because there aren't independent witnesses on the ground, speaking to families and really describing the funerals and describing it, it's past. I mean, everybody knows about it, but it hasn't got that sort of that real power of a
Mm.
story that you get in a war zone. And I think that's kind of symbolic of what we're seeing about the Iran coverage at the moment. It lacks that human element of what war is.
Yeah, which is the most important part of war coverage because it's always about people. It starts with politics, but it ends with people, right? So can I just ask you this? So for those that are listening in that maybe aren't frontline war correspondents, never have been, how do you verify that situation? So the story breaks. Normally, the country that's being attacked will put in a statement out and say the school has been hit, mass casualties, and I think this attack actually happened first thing in the morning, kind of in the time of kids would be at school and commuters would be on the street. And so they say this, but then your immediate job is to validate and to prove that. Now, let's say you're not in Iran, but you're somewhere else. How would you do that? And then in Iran, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I think there's different things. I mean, if you are in Iran and you cover Iran, you understand better how the state media report. So do they have a history of just entirely fabricating things? Do they have a certain sort of journalistic work around, even though they're state controlled? How do they work? So I think from the beginning, from our expertise in Iran, you could see there's something real here. It's not a sort of a made up thing. And the images seem good, and the images give us a lot of material for which to then take our digital investigators, be it in Paris or Washington, wherever around the world, and start to do what we call OSINT, which is it's sort of investigatory work on the web, pioneered by groups such as Bellingcat, which is and a lot of big media have these kind of teams now, and you can start to look at the images, check the timestamps, geolocate them, start to look at maps and satellites and work out what this building could be, where it would be, and you can start to build a picture of where it is. And then you can start to also, once you know where it is, start to think, hang on, how can we ring around sources? How can we ring people in the neighborhood? How can we ring people in the city and start maybe to build a profile or get some information about what's happened? But, that's a slow process. And in a fast moving news story like a war, stories come and they go very quickly. Something can be the top issue, the US sinking a boat off Sri Lanka can be a stunning event for a couple of hours, and then something just moves on because there's so much news. So the difficulty with something like that girls' school thing, as I said, is to come back to it, to contextualize. And it's quite boring stuff in a way because you're really just trying to get into the weeds and trying to ascertain it. So there's actually been a lot of good follow-up stuff on that, but it doesn't have the powerful punch that it would have done if we had been there. I think there were funerals of all these kids, funerals of all the the families and so on. There was some strong images that came from Iranian state media, but again, if we were there telling that story, it would have been very, very different.
Can I talk about having state independent in things like that? That's clearly an enormous human tragedy. That transcends war. And your responsibility, in fact, let me ask you, I'm assuming you feel it's your responsibility to make sure that you cover that from an independent perspective, from the human perspective. But it's very hard to do that if you're in a nation obsessed with secrecy that's under attack.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're loyal to the precepts of journalism, where you are, telling the stories of people who don't have a voice, right? And so that is a delicate balance. And in the world in which we live, this incredibly polarized environment, which has been on the rocket fuel of social media, it's very divisive. You will be attacked for doing that. You will, as all media who try to report inside Gaza, you will be attacked. You will be attacked if you're trying to report on the human suffering story inside Iran, because you're doing the work of the enemy. You're humanizing the enemy. Of course, we don't see it that way at all. We see that as trying to bring the story of the victims of war. There's the government of Iran and there's the people of Iran. So that is a very clear mission. But in the world, in the media ecosystem in which we work, with that level of polarization, it does lead to some fairly unpleasant attacks on us.
Yeah. So my feedback, and I think we've spoken about this before, my feedback from when I covered the war in the Balkans was that I turned up in Bosnia. I was able, because I wasn't embedded, I was independent. I was able to move between both factions. Yeah. And so you spend your time trying to find truth. Okay. But it's pointless trying to work out truth in who's right and who's wrong when people are so entrenched in their positions. And so you learn there are a million different multifaceted versions of truth in a war zone, but a school being hit by a bomb is a fact. And you have to just kind of, for me, that was my biggest learning at my first conflict, was to kind of remove preconceptions, because people are powerfully, strongly of an opinion because they're dying for it, right? And so you can't navigate your way around that without just trying to be honest and follow the facts. Can I ask you this? So you mentioned earlier on that there's virtually no internet in Iran. You can go and find the story, but you might not be able to get it out. How are you tackling that?
I would say there's 1 to 2% of connectivity, so you have to sort of find your moments.
Is it time based, or is it standing on the top of a hill?
No, it comes and goes. It comes and goes. There are also some countries' SIM cards which work in Iran for some strange reason. So there are lots of little ways around it, but it ultimately is limited connectivity. The other big sort of story about Iran, of course, is Starlink. Because there were a lot of Starlink terminals have come into Iran in the last sort of couple of years. But after the strikes in June last year, it became a very, very political thing to have a Starlink. It became almost an act of espionage to have a Starlink. So I think there are a lot of Starlinks hidden under the sofas, as it were. And I think the Iranians have also become quite good at sort of combating that. But I think there's also great potential danger that comes with that. I think that, especially at this point, I think the state is nervous, and think of sort of potential spies and infiltrators everywhere. So that capacity. But I think we can, like in Ukraine, you cannot underestimate now what a role Starlink plays in conflict, and plays not even in managing the war side of a conflict from the military side, and we've seen that in Ukraine with Elon Musk being able to switch off Starlink for the Russians, and the Ukrainians taking a whole bunch of territory, in the days afterwards. And I think that's certainly the case also within Iran. There's a sort of a cyber battle over Starlink and how to use it, which I think is kind of fascinating.
Phil, how much are you able to share about the people that you've got on the ground? You say you've got 5 reporters there. Are they locals? Are they people you've sent from?
Yeah, no, they're a mix. So one of the which they're a mix of Iranians and foreigners. We've got a couple of foreigners and three Iranians, I think, and so that means also we have a delicate line to tread with our people there. So there are things we won't do from Tehran, which they can help us with, that we can do from elsewhere. And so the real benefits from having people there and having that expertise, people who understand the country, people who understand what's coming next, people who can have interesting sources and context. But there's also a fine line because they're also vulnerable, So we have to always manage that difficult process of how to push the boundaries and where are the boundaries. I think that's going to be something really interesting in the days and weeks ahead. Obviously there's a certain strategy that says Iran is people of Iran are going to rise up, or the country's going to implode, or the government's going to collapse. So where are these boundaries? It's a dangerous moment where there's a lot of paranoia and so on. At the moment we're feeling more restricted. We're feeling, on the streets are heavy. The streets of Tehran are heavy. There's militia and heavily armed militia and security everywhere. So it's sort of at the moment that it's always, it feels really quite suffocating. But that could change, right? So it's where are the boundaries, and judging the boundaries is pretty hard, and that we got to play the long game on that one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So again, I defer to your greater expertise on this, but in my experience of covering conflict, it depends. Sometimes the leader is removed early, and that creates a whole series of different challenges. You have a vacuum, you have an attempt to seize power, you have the existing regime acting even more frightened or aggressive to protect themselves. Now, we've got that situation here. So the Supreme Leader, I think, was killed on the very first day, right? In the very first strike, maybe. I'm not sure if it was, but it was very close to.
Yeah.
But we don't have, the regime is not toppled, as I understand it. There is still some semblance of the guard still being in charge. So are you able to tell us what the current situation is, as best you can see it?
Yeah, I mean, again, from our reporting and understanding what we can see and feel and speak to within the country, it certainly seems the regime is still in control. I think it's one of those, the structures of the Iranian Revolution are considerable. The Revolutionary Guard structure, the sort of militia army that was created to sort of preserve the revolution post 1979 is deep and strong, within the country, and goes,
He was the longest serving leader in the Middle East, as I understand it.
Yeah, but exactly. But I think also we have to remember that he was 86 years old, and underneath that there was a very considerable sort of structure, and that in a sense they prepared for this to some degree. So the structures of the militias and the guards and so on is deep, and I think for that reason, when I look around and read around and speak, it's not a given that this government will fall. I think that was one of the concerns that many analysts who know Iran well have said from the beginning. Is it's not clear that government will fall. You could even get more hardliners within the government, ending up taking over. It's very, very uncertain. So it's I think. Certainly at this point, they still feel very much in control. We can see that the Americans are talking up, creating a Kurdish insurgency up in the north, which would obviously, be an interesting development. But that, in a sense, could also lead to more breakup and more chaos, and wouldn't necessarily affect what happens in Tehran, right? So at this point, pretty uncertain. But I think what people have to understand is, it's not a one-man regime. It's a deep structured regime that goes down to every level and every village and every town. And it's going to take a lot more than 5 or 6 days of bombing, I think, just to unleash that.
Yeah, I think there was or it certainly seems to have been a misconception that this was a pushover, but this is actually quite an established militaristic country that has structures in place, and as you said, had been preparing, kind of knew this was likely to happen, I think. Can I just ask you a question? I want to move to how you're running it from Paris, actually, in a moment, but I just want to ask you a question about the nuclear capacity, because this war is, if you're to believe the prevailing wisdom, This is basically about nuclear proliferation, the risk of Iran getting a bomb. So there'd been an attack. There was a series of targeted assassinations that took place, not even in Iran, actually, to try and remove, if you like, the brain's trust that we're building Iran's nuclear capacity. It's been enriching uranium. It says it was doing it for peaceful means, for power and for knowledge, but enrichment was going way beyond, if you again to be believed, that it was going way beyond what was required for civilian uses. So there was a bit of kind of cat and mouse here. There was a bit of provocation, which kind of led to this. So this war is justified based on a risk of nuclear proliferation. Is that your understanding? Is that what you're hearing? And do you have any insight so far as to whether or not that nuclear capacity has been impacted?
Well, one of the things that has become increasingly difficult to follow is the many, many different justifications for the war, which have now come out of Washington. So, there are 5 or 6, and they can sort of contradict each other from day to day. We talked about taking out new missile developments, talking about at some point talking about regime change. There's talking about the nuclear program, hitting back against a possible imminent attack. So there's a very confusing narrative coming out of Washington. What we can also say is that most of the intelligence assessments that have been reported have said that there really was no imminent threat on anything related to missiles or related to the nuclear program. That those programs obviously exist, but there was nothing that they could see that's imminent. And the sort of general feeling was that the nuclear program was pretty degraded from the military strikes back in June. There's no doubt that Iran, really didn't want to give up its nuclear capability, and it is committed to building a bomb. It always has been. I think it sees that as a sort of guarantee of the survival of the revolution. It's always been a thing that Khamenei never wanted to give up. But any idea this was a key point. I think what many analysts have seen as the reason for the attack, or it was the weakness of Iran. That it was a moment, I think Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has been pushing for an attack on Iran for 30 years. There's nothing new. But what we've seen in the last year or so is Iran has started to look very weak. Iran looked very strong before October 7. There was this big crescent of allies they were supporting in South Lebanon, in Syria, and everyone, all these militias in Iraq. And they really looked like this axis of resistance to Israel. It looked pretty firm. And everything that's happened since October 7, Israel has pretty much gutted Hezbollah in Lebanon, has really, everything's changed obviously in Syria. Iran has started to look very weak. And I think the Israelis very much saw as this is the moment to attack because Iran looks so weak, and maybe there won't be such a good opportunity. I think that was really one of the prevailing feelings, certainly coming out of Tel Aviv.
Okay, so I'd like to ask, a lot of the audience of this newsletter are journalists, and so allow me to nerd out a little bit and talk about the things that you and I think about a lot. So you've got a team of people on the ground who are working under extremely difficult circumstances. We've talked about that, getting the primary information from the scene and trying to get it back to you in some way. I understand. But there's an entire mechanism out of sight that people never see. It's like the feet on the duck going a million miles underneath. And that's happening in Paris and London, and you're following the sun. Tell me about that operation, because you've got that whole thing under your control. So tell me about what that means and how many people you've got and what your day is looking like at the moment. So I bet it's day and night for you.
So, I think what's one of the great advances in journalism, and which I think sort of started during the Syrian war, I think, is what I call the development of OSINT. Journalists using investigatory techniques on the internet to do investigations, to track people down. And some of the most powerful journalism now is the combination of having boots on the ground and eyes on the web. That's the way we see it. Um, and Iran is just that classic example. It's so hard to report. So you're like, how are we going to complement what's going on in Iran? How do we back them up? How do we, how else do we work the story? So for us, that means we have some amazing people who really work on sourcing UGC video out of Iran, because there's not, the internet is down, but people are, there are things being uploaded from different places. So this becomes a real source of images that tell the story, and also information. You're starting to see, wow, here's a video from this town. This is the police station. It's on fire. All these little details and stuff that comes out. So the work of the kind of UGC team is amazing. I think we've sourced. You have to verify it. So this is deep verification work, because you have to be careful. There's a lot of false AI slop. AI has added a whole new, different dimension of this, because it's so easy to make a false video. It's so easy to just generate rubbish.
And there are people with very strong motivations to do that, right?
Or people who just think it's fun, So, there's a sort of huge amount of what we call AI slop. So finding, genuine video, verifying them, finding whatever, and then giving them to clients. That's a really important part of what we do, because you're filtering what's being uploaded from Iran and finding things that are important. So that's important. And then related to that, what we've got around the world, and it's really a follow the sun thing, is you identify all the people in your network who speak Farsi. So we've got about 10 to 15 Farsi speakers so we have a team that literally is constantly plugged in 24 hours a day. And what they're doing is they're following everything on social networks, all any information coming out in Farsi, things being uploaded, statements, following Iran TV through the night. So that really, and of course, many of them have contacts in Iran or on the borders and so on. So they're also calling friends, calling contacts, calling people they know, and trying to build a picture of what's going on inside Iran from outside Iran. So that's a really, really key part. And then this is about journalism, Ricky. What do we bring to the table? You bring to the table, expertise, context, and the ability to filter information and to verify it. The big thing of the way information runs now is verification. There's so much information. There's a surfeit of information, some true, some real, some parcels. So the big job is to filter, to find the things that are worth doing, worth giving, and so on. So this team is working well. That's a huge sort of part of what we do. And then linked to that too, you're thinking, how can we get people in? So one of the things we're thinking of is how, where we'll go. So we've got a team up in Kurdistan at the moment, because we think that there's obviously a lot going on up in Kurdistan. There's been bombings up there. We think the Iranians have been trying to attack Kurdish groups up there. There's probably been some airstrikes from the Israelis and the Americans as well. Donald Trump has talked about trying to get the Kurds involved and so on. So again, you're trying to attach yourself to bits of the story. We've got a team up there. We've got a team also on the border with Turkey and Iran, because what you want to do is you want to meet people who are coming out, because they will have stories, they may have pictures. So trying to get people thinking. Same on the Afghan-Iran border. Obviously, we have a bureau in Kabul. So, we've got a team on the Afghan-Iran border. You want to get people coming out with stories who can tell you more freely what they've seen and what is going on.
So you've got a big job. You're managing lots and lots of different angles. This is an empathy question. When you're getting into the office, I don't know whether you cycle in or you get the bus in or you get the train in or whether you drive in, I have no idea. But what's in your head spinning when you're on your way to work? So, you've got to pull all these disparate, completely unpredictable strands together. You're the boss, all right? So what's going through your head?
Well, Ricky, actually, I find it in some way quite calming, because there's a lot of muscle memory here. These are the things that we know how to do. And, this is a very vulnerable moment for the media, on a commercial level, on a freedom of speech level. The media is under attack around the world. Journalism is under attack around the world. And at moments like this is quite validating, because what you're bringing to the table, and the values you're putting on the table. How vital the work that you do is. And I think you said it very well in your last post, talking about how you were following the opening days. The information ecosystem relies on what we do. We have to find a way to make them properly pay for it. But this is a validation of what we do. The day to day, when you don't have these big stories, we tend to be grappling more with strategy and AI and how we're going to integrate in that systems and what's it going to mean for this job and that job. You get something like this. In some ways, it's quite liberating. We know what we do, and you have good structures in place to do it. So sure, you're reading a lot and you're getting in, you're checking in where are the problems and so on and so forth. But in some ways, it's more calming than some of the bigger picture questions, existential questions about the future of the media that we're dealing with day to day.
Well said, sir. I couldn't agree more. It's interesting in recent conversations, even now, I hear from people in AI that are generally more on the AI product side saying to me, well, we just don't need news. We've trained our engines. It's fine. We've got this. And I'm like, yeah, but something's going to happen tomorrow that you don't know is going to happen. And how are you going to respond if no one's telling you? You can only regurgitate through AI about something that's happened if somebody tells you that it's happened, right? It's a bit like putting a kid in school and going, well, the child's in school, that's fantastic, but if there's no teachers, he's not going to learn much. And this is kind of the conflict that's occurring. It's a logic battle. Yeah. An engineer in an AI company doesn't think like that. And the irony is that the last time we spoke was obviously with Gaza. I'd been in a meeting with Microsoft, very senior level, board level at Microsoft, talking about this. And one of the guys had said, we already know what's going to happen in the future. We've built tools for that. And I was like, well, what's going to be the biggest story in the world on Thursday? And then about 2 weeks later, Gaza happened. And so you'd think by now that might have sunk in, but it hasn't. And so we just have to have this blind faith that this is absolutely critical, and we just have to keep going, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a sort of tech lobby that is extremely convinced that there is a solution to everything, and that there is a solution to journalism. And I'm always struck by, we always have these discussions saying, look, it's not a business model to say you'll miss us when we're gone, but my God, you'll miss us when we're gone, right? And so the work that we do, I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't have to change. It doesn't mean that we don't have to innovate. We do. There's a lot of legacy things that we're doing that are ridiculous. They will go. We have to evolve. We have no choice. But society has to also understand the value of journalism and the value of what we do. And I can see that, and you probably too, Ricky, in discussions with intelligent people that who look at you and say, I'm lost. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to think. I don't know where information comes from, right? And, the state of the information ecosystem at this point is extremely fragile. And so there is really a need to think of what those solutions are and to talk about the value of what we do, because it's very seductive. From the sort of the tech narrative of literally, but we will find solution to these things. Well, how do you find a solution to walking around, the battlefield of Tehran? Well, what is your solution for that? You won't.
Yes. I was on a call. Sorry, I've got lots of narratives to give you today, but I was on a call earlier this week with a load of industry groups representing 25, 30,000 publishers, something like that, So there's a lot of influence in that room. There's a lot of people being represented, a lot of journalism, on a global scale being represented in that group. And one of the main conversations was, the piece we're not doing well is the piece talking about ourselves. We spend all our time talking about the journalism that we cover. We rarely talk about the reason the journalism gets done is because of who we are. And we are trained professional communicators, and we should do a far better story about talking about ourselves.
Absolutely.
We came away from that conversation talking about how we're going to activate and mobilize our own muscle memory within our own businesses to help people appreciate in the information void or the misinformation. It's the opposite, actually. It's not a misinformation. It's not an information void. It's a misinformation I don't know, what do you call it? Mix,
Yeah.
disaster, nightmare, a mess, misinformation mess. We've got to get the truth narrative through, and that's our job, right?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate your description that, you know, I'm going to work in the morning, but the actual fact is that I know exactly what I'm doing today, and I'm doing something massively important for humanity.
Yeah, and well, you're absolutely right, Ricky. With the media have been very, very bad telling the story of journalism because we've never had to. You know, we've always, we've all brought up with we're the fourth estate. We're part of the, we're part of the landscape of society. And what you've seen with the kind of authoritarian populist push around the world in the last, 10 or plus years is an attempt to decredibilize what we do and say, actually, you're not part of society. You're just a business. You're just, you're in fact, you're worse. You're undermining society. So, and that you don't have a right to come in. You know, there's a huge issue around access. Access could be by, could be a government that says, well, we're not going to hold any press conferences anymore. It could be the prime minister who says, oh, I always used to give to press conferences or TV. I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't have to. And so you're seeing this attempt to cut out accountability, I guess. And that has serious implications for societies around the world.
My real worry is that people lose faith in truth, and they think that it's a forlorn hope to think that you could possibly get to a fact, or worse still, that the thing you thought was an established fact, even though it is an established fact, might not be a fact because of some other narrative. And we seem to have lost that, or the society seems to have lost faith in being able to believe anything, because so many powers are saying don't believe anything, and that feels like a really dangerous place to be.
Well, there is an astonishing amount of gaslighting. Somebody literally saying something and then or doing something, and then telling you that they did not say or do what you saw them say.
Right in the face.
There was an extraordinary.
Exactly that.
There was an extraordinary exchange with Marco Rubio where he said a couple of days ago, he said that the United States had acted because Israel was going to act, and we had to act because we knew we were going to be attacked when Israel acted. And Trump got upset about that and walked it back. And then Rubio the next day, and the same journalist asked him the same question. He was like, I never said that. Were you here yesterday? He said to the journalist. And the journalist said, yes, I was here yesterday. And I asked the question. But unbelievable that a Secretary of State at that level could simply say, I did not say what I said yesterday, when it's literally, it is on camera, it is recorded, it is there. And we see a lot of that. You see a lot of that. And we, in our traditional fact-based world, we think that's ridiculous. Everyone's going to see it. But in actual fact, it works. One of the terrible things about misinformation and so on and so forth is you don't have to convince. You just have to sow doubt. So someone says, well, yeah, he did say that, but then he said he didn't say that. And then, okay, so it works because we've always thought with misinformation and that kind of lying and authoritarian lying and so on, that you have to convince people. You don't have to convince people. You have to sow doubt. You have to sow doubt in the credibility and thinking, well, I don't know, maybe it was a bit more complicated than what he said. And that's the information ecosystem in which we're working. And so as a result, the end user is often lost. And as I said, I hear it all the time from people. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to believe, and they actively think. I've had that often. People see good journalism brands who they'll be told don't believe a word that anything's in that brand because they're all biased or they're all liars and so on. And intelligent people again have doubts about it. And that's the way the system works.
It's amazing. There's a couple of people on here. If you've got any questions, please type them in and I'll try and get them answered. I was just going to say this, Phil, this classic chaos theory. That's a very classic and well-known and long-established methodology sometimes for powers to try and destabilize the norm, is to just sow doubt in certain places. And then the problem is if you just keep doing it, and the more obvious it is in many ways, it's more powerful. So fake news as a phrase has now become a catch cry for anyone that finds themselves on the wrong side of an uncomfortable fact.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, especially if you are the messenger, you know. We very much saw this in Gaza. We see this to a degree in Iran. If you are witnessing something that people don't want you to witness,
Yep.
you are then the enemy. So being in the middle, being fair, trying to do facts. Our societies are so polarized, and in particular, the information ecosystem built around social media is so polarizing that when you're in the middle trying to do nuance, that is not valued by the algorithm. That is just
Mhm.
not valued by the algorithm. So we've got this sort of jet fuel on the left and jet fuel on the right. And serious journalism is about trying to navigate the center and trying to be fair to people and trying to tell a story based on reality as you see it, based on facts as you see it. But that is just not valued in the ecosystem that we built, which is built on the outrage economy. The algorithms are about extremes,
Yeah.
and so nobody wants. Well, a lot of intelligent people do want the middle, but the mass is kind of which side are you on? Are you on Iran's side or the US's side? Surely you think that Khamenei was an awful man and should be killed. Well, of course you can agree with that pretty easily. But does that mean you have to go along with a war? Does that mean when you're doing stories about people who are injured or killed or whatever it be, civilians in Iran, you have to take an opinion on that? No, of course not. Um,
Mhm.
that's the challenge of where we are at this point.
So, Phil, I was going to say that, again, we've both been in the business a fair few years. We've got some. You've done a much better job with your hair than I have. But the thing I'd say here is that there's a big gap between reporting and journalism, and I make this case a lot, especially to young journalists that I talk to. Reporting the news, this has happened, is something that almost anyone can do in a digital age because you can find it, you can cut and paste it, you can post it. That's news. Journalism, though, is the thing that you just described, which is to go and find the thing that somebody in power doesn't want you to know. And
Mm.
that isn't written down anywhere. You have to go and find that. Okay. And sometimes you have to find it at great expense and extreme danger. Or it may be that there's a series of facts that are out there that don't seem to quite tie together. So, what is it?
Yep.
What's the bit we're missing? What's the mortar that doesn't make sense here? What's the strategy? What's the reason? What's the bigger play? What's the real motivation behind this? Is it oil? Is it nuclear? Is it power? Is it regime
Mm.
change? What is it? And journalists have to go out there and put themselves on the front line and put that out there based on the information that they have, for which they have to be judged. And I think every journalist is comfortable with that. But what I think I worry the world's lost contact with is there's a difference between reporting and journalism. And having an opinion isn't necessarily wrong, or even putting your name out there on something that that nobody else knows that might become a fact in the future when people learn it isn't a thing you shouldn't do. It's in fact the most important thing you should.
Mm.
You agree?
Yeah, I think what people forget with journalism that there's an entire ethical framework and a training around how you do your job. This gets lost in the discussion. I mean, I was on a panel recently, and someone was saying, "Well, thank goodness for all the influencers in Gaza who were there and who were able to fill the breach of the media." And I'm like, well, no, because we have rules about how you would go and take images and photos and videos and how you would frame it. I don't know that behind that video that you're streaming, there isn't a guy from Hamas with a gun to your head telling you to do that. I don't know that. I know that if my journalists filed some images like that, that there wouldn't be a guy from Hamas with a gun behind their head, because if they'd been forced to do that, they wouldn't send us the images. So there is a whole ethical framework to journalism that obviously that's what we have to talk about more. You talked about how bad we are at telling our story, and I think that's it, because it's very easy to think. And I had this the other day. I said to someone said, "Oh, well, there are loads of images about the girls' school in the south of Iran. That story's out there. Everyone knows it's true." And you're like, "Well, no, you don't understand that. There's a huge misinformation campaign against that, and so you have to have the journalistic skills to be able to, pull it together and prove what is true and what is not. So that whole ethical framework to the way we work. We have a huge, well, it's not printed anymore, but it's a style book. It's a great big
Mhm.
hundreds of pages, which you probably remember from your time in media. Media used to have that, this is an ethics guide to the
Yeah.
way we treat everything, and what we do in circumstances and what we don't do, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and how much you can, alter a photo ethically before it becomes manipulation. All these kind of things that are extremely important, because the tools that we have now means that you can manipulate anything, especially imagery. You can manipulate anything.
And that was one of the things I wanted to ask you, actually. So when we talked about Gaza, when we were in the midst of that, well, we still are, but when we talked about that, you said it was a very different war, that one, because it was happening in real time. As you said, the flood of information.
Yeah.
Is there anything you've noticed that's specifically different in this one? Is there anything that's advanced in a good way or a bad way that you've spotted this time? Because you'd see the nuances, because you're closest to it.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things is we're just not used to not having connectivity. So in a sense, when we used, it's an astonishing thing. You think, wow, we must know instantly whatever, and Iran is still pretty much a black hole, which at this point in time, with Starlink and satellites and the way the world's information system works and the way the interconnectivity of the world, that's a strange situation to be in. We sort of don't sort of expect that. I think what obviously, if we were to take the lessons of the war in Ukraine, this is clearly a massive AI drone war, technology war. I think there are all kinds of new weapons being tested we're probably not really aware of. But if we look at the process of the war in Ukraine, which really began as a First World War trench artillery warfare, to now just pretty much a drone war and an AI-driven drone war. I think the Ukrainians are going to make 4 or 5 million drones this year. We're talking about creating drone nettings. You're talking about swarms of drones driven by AI. So there's obviously a massive technological breakthrough change going on here. Of which we're in the heart of it now. What we can't see a lot of that because we don't know what the Israelis and the Americans are up to. We don't know much about a lot of that. We've never had a Pentagon that's quite. It really doesn't talk much anymore. It talks in sort of like a sort of cowboy talk of what they're doing, but very little sort of clear briefing of sort of the things that they're doing. But clearly, this is, as you said, in watching the coverage of the war, this is the first sort of AI journalism, conflict that you've sort of seen, as it were. And clearly, that there's a huge AI technical thing going on that is there, but the story I think is yet to be told about exactly what that means.
The thing that blew my mind in that article, and I'll let you go in a minute because you've got much more important things to be doing than talking to me. The thing that blew my mind in this article here, that really blew my mind, was as a news editor, okay, whenever something like this happens, I always behave the same way. The first thing I do, a bit like you said, I go into an autopilot mode where I just know that I'm going to surround myself by information sources, okay? I'm now the nerve center of this. I've got resources all stacked up here, ready to go. I just need to get information into me so I know where I'm going. Here. But this time I did something different. Instead of just turning on all the televisions and all the radios and all of my staff and everything else, I turned on AI and I asked the questions I would have asked those around me. And the information that I received back at pace was amazing. It synthesized information from hundreds and hundreds of publishers in real time. It updated me on alerts. And it started on its own. This was Claude. This was Anthropic's Claude. It started to offer me backgrounders I hadn't even asked for, or details about things that it thought was contextually relevant. Obviously, taking its lead from what people were writing about. I learned about which nerve centers were running missile defense, and how Doha was being affected. And then suddenly there was air raid sirens going off in Tel Aviv, and I literally felt. I felt like a superhuman news editor for the first time. It was an incredible synthesis of all of the information I needed at my fingertips. And there were just 20 stories in my not even in my inbox, just there in front of me. It was truly mind-blowing for me, which is why I wrote about it, and it's why you and I suddenly reconnected. I just couldn't believe it. And it just, I'll tell you what it did, actually. It made my fingers itch, and made me miss being a frontline reporter again. But look, for you, thank you so much for your work. I know you're working incredibly hard, and in very trying circumstances. I want to thank you for that. You know, on behalf of everybody that's tuning in, mate, all power to you. And I hope your people on the ground there stay safe in a very dangerous place.
Thanks a lot, Ricky. Great to talk. Take care.
Absolute pleasure. See you next time.
See you, mate.
Bye, mate.